Thanks, Megan.
Great. Thank you. So I'm just going to open us up really quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to the experts who are working, day to day on our rate changes and billing. So just first, I'd like to say welcome to our desktop workshop. We have a good number of folks here. We also have another session that we're offering next week. So just as a plug, if you find the information that we have here today useful, please do encourage your colleagues to sign up for next week's session. And, as Annette noted, we are going to have these materials shared afterwards as well. But we are here today to talk about our FY27 rate change, and with rates is so closely aligned to billing that we wanted to provide some updates and reminders for billing as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Ryan Bondia to kick us off, and then you'll hear from a couple of other folks at GSA Fleet as well. We are all here to support you, and we'll be monitoring the Q&A session throughout the session. So please feel free to throw your questions in there, and we'll either type answers or answer them at the end. We should have time for that. So Ryan, you ready to go?
Yep, thanks, Megan. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. My name is Ryan. I'm joined by my colleagues Reese and Sezen, and we're going to talk today about rates and billing. So a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. Of course, the FY27 rate change for leasing rates, an update to the high cost threshold, some new things about optional equipment and unique rates, VCSS and wallet, followed by billing reminders, and lastly, we'll close out with G-invoicing. Like Megan and Annette mentioned, the Q&A is open, and we'll pause periodically throughout the session today to take a look and answer those questions as you may have them. So with that, we'll get right into the FY27 rate change. Beginning October 1st for FY27, GSA Fleet is implementing a 5% lease rate increase that applies to both mileage and monthly rates, but that 5% is aggregate and implemented across the entire fleet. As always, individual vehicles will have individual rate changes. Some of the key financial drivers that are contributing to that 5% rate increase are notably the increase to fuel cost, so up 32.6% in our FY27 plan compared to FY26. Acquisition prices have leveled off largely, but are still increasing, but thankfully not as much as they have in recent years, which is a big contributing factor to us only implementing a 5% rate increase this year rather than the larger ones that you have seen recently. In line with this, maintenance and repair costs are also still rising, and that plays a key role in our rates as well. Here is just a brief overview of 3 different examples to highlight that aggregate rate change and the different rate changes at the vehicle level that can constitute that rate change. So you can see the SIN 20, a very common vehicle that is in the GSA leased fleet. In FY27, we're actually decreasing the monthly rate by 5%, and the mileage rate is seeing no change. So FY27, we're seeing the first year in a couple of years where we're decreasing rates to balance that based on those SINs performance in our fleet. The 9C, another very common SIN, is seeing no rate change on either the monthly or the mileage rate in FY27, while the 55L is getting a slightly higher rate increase compared to the aggregate 5% of 12% to both the monthly rate and the mileage rate. All of the rates are available on gsa.gov as well as gsafleet.gov, and you'll be able to view those FY27 rates today. They're live today, and so you can go and view them. And of course, you can always reach out to your FSR if you have specific questions about the vehicles that you lease. A note on fuel prices. We've sent a communication to all customers, and this is something that, as you are well aware, has changed up and down quite a lot recently. But we are very closely monitoring the volatility in fuel prices, and we currently do not have any plans to implement a fuel surcharge, but we want to bring it to your attention in case there is a need. You will be made aware of that well before we actually implement it, but just be aware that this is something that GSA Fleet is paying close attention to and will keep you apprised of as the new fiscal year unfolds. Next, I want to talk about the high cost threshold module. So this affects a very small population of vehicles. It's about 6,500 vehicles now that fall into this. So these are vehicles that are capitalized at a high cost and have a unique rate assessed to them to help compensate for the additional costs that managing those vehicles include. So the old threshold was 75,000. That has been the threshold for many, many years. Beginning in FY27, the threshold will now be 100,000. So those vehicles below 100,000 will now move to standard rates, and those vehicles above 100,000 will be assessed unique high cost threshold rates. Those rates, again, are not something that we can publish because they are unique to that vehicle based on the capitalized value. So that you will have to go to your FSR, who has tools at their disposal that can help you calculate exactly what that rate you will be assessed is. So what does this mean for those vehicles that are moving to standard rates? Effectively, those vehicles currently capitalized between 75,000 and 100,000 will not see a difference to the amount that they are charged in FY27. They will see the cost split slightly differently on their bills because they will now be assessed a standard rate and an optional equipment rate that is the difference between those two amounts. The previous high cost threshold rate that they were being assessed and the standard rate for FY27. So good news for those customers. They can expect no changes in their net billing on the monthly side for FY27. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about optional equipment and unique rate adjustments. And first, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Sezen to talk about optional equipment rate changes.
Thanks, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. I'm just popping in to mention a slight update to our optional equipment rates. So first of all, the way we calculate optional equipment rates is not changing. For those who are not familiar, the optional equipment rates are currently calculated as shown in this yellow formula here. That's the cost of the equipment times the 10% fee divided by the average expected months in the fleet of that vehicle type. The way that we calculate the average expected months in the fleet is based on the average age that we expect that vehicle to be sold. And we've noticed that this average age at sale can change over time. We haven't updated average age at sale in a while, so starting in FY27, we'll be recalculating the average age at sale for all of our vehicle types on an annual basis. So what that means for your optional equipment rate is that it could go up or down from year to year. We have an example of both of these scenarios here, so you can see how that works. Starting with the sedan at the top, we see in year one, it has equipment that costs $1,320 with the 10% fee. And this particular vehicle type is expected to be sold at 84 months. So its monthly rate is $15.71. When we reassess average age at sale in year two, you can see that it's actually being kept in the fleet longer. That's what we discover in our analysis. So the cost of the equipment is spread out over more months. that means the monthly OE will actually decrease. In this case, it will decrease down to $14.35 because the new average age at sale is 92 months. With the pickup truck on the bottom there, we have the reverse scenario. So we have equipment that costs $5,500 with the 10% fee, and in year one, calculated average age at sale for this vehicle type to be 123 months, giving us a monthly optional equipment rate of $44.72. When we recalculate the average age at sale in year two, we're actually finding that this particular type of vehicle is not staying in the fleet as long. And so that means the cost of that equipment is spread out over fewer months. So the monthly rate is going to increase up to $51.89. These are just examples here, just to be clear. And so why are we doing this? As I mentioned before, we have not updated our average age at sale in a while. And we want to ensure that we're accurately and transparently recovering our costs. And by doing this on an annual basis, it will allow us to limit volatility. And we do know that any large swings in rates create budgeting challenges. We're going to work very hard to limit any large and unexpected swings. But going forward, doing this on an annual basis will allow us to better do that. I'll hand it back to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Sez. Next, I want to talk briefly about the new rate pass-through model. So in April of 2026, we issued full service WEX cards to all customers regardless of their unique rate type. Similar to the high cost threshold module, this affects a relatively small portion of the GSA leased fleet. However, this is an exciting update because it allows us to better support you in emergency situations. So the new automated pass-through module will AIE all charges assessed to those customers on unique rates for charges that are not covered by that rate type, but it will not stop them from using that card in emergent situations when they might need to. So for example, if you're on a fuel only or a no mileage unique rate, auto AIEs for maintenance, towing, car washes, etc. will be issued if they are charged on the WEX card. And if you're on a maintenance only or no mileage unique rates, then we'll auto AIE all fuel costs. We're actively monitoring unique rate vehicles to ensure general compliance with this, but we're very excited to be able to offer this service to our customers. So before I pass it to Reese to talk to you about VCSS and Wallet, I'm going to just take a look at the Q&A and make sure there's nothing that I missed. Great question. Are the FY27 rates out yet? Yes, they absolutely are. You can view them at the same place in gsa.gov where you view all previous rate bulletins, but you can also view them directly in gsafleet.gov. And on the vehicle tab for your specific vehicle, you'll be able to see in real time what your rate is being assessed. Of course, right now that's the FY26 rate, but if you go to the lease rates tab, you'll be able to see the FY27 rates loaded there as well. With that, let me pause for just a second. On the rate bulletin, how can we see the FSR rates? So the instances on the rate bulletin where it says see FSR for the monthly rate are instances where the majority of vehicles in that SIN are high cost threshold vehicles, and we cannot publish individual rates for that because it's unique to the vehicle based on the capital value. Your FSR has a tool available that will help them calculate that unique rate for FY27. However, if you're still seeing issues, then please reach out to the business oversight inbox. There'll be a slide at the end of this presentation with that as well. We're happy to help.
And I would say, Ryan, we can go ahead and continue with the presentation. We have lots of questions coming in, and we'll hit them at the end or hit them in the chat.
Great. Reese, with that, I
Cool.
will
Thanks,
pass it
Ryan.
over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so for VCSS here, so VCSS is the GSA enterprise system that all of our customers use to be able to download their billing statements. And so within VCSS, you can obviously download the PDF version, the Excel version. You you can also check any sort of balances data and things like that nature. One thing that is that we like want to make very clear, like it is that payments are not made through VCSS. There are other sources of like payment methods that we ask our customers to use through there. And so VCSS, so the actual BOAC is referred to at so it's referred to as an account code. So in the system, there will be a field that says account code. So you would just paste the BOAC in there, and then what's very important is that in order for you to be able to pull any statement data, the actual BOAC needs to be registered. That's within VCSS, right? So if a single BOAC isn't registered, right, then then you won't be able to pull any sort of statement data on until someone actually goes in there to actually like register the actual BOAC. And then lastly, so anything can be downloaded by any GSA Fleet business line, right? So whether it's leasing, purchasing, short-term rental, and the managed services. And then lastly, that's the link to VCSS. But if you don't have the link, the way that I do it is I just type in VCSS into Google, and it would be one of the top links there. So for the next slide here, this is going to be the home screen. So the left button is like to actually log in, right? And then the like middle button is where you would register the BOAC, or if you don't have an account, you will use that to make an account. And then the third button is to basically do any sort of issue fixing, right? So if there's a listed admin that is no longer working there, that'll be the area that you can remove that person. So for the next slide here, moving to the GSA wallet via gsafleet.gov. So wallets it is for all GSA Fleet business lines. So these are all the current business lines that we have. So the next slide showcases to you for the next slide, Ryan. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Yeah, so for wallet, so all federal customers must use wallet. So whether if you're a tribal or a sort of contractor, you will not use the system. So on the next slide, so for wallet, for every BOAC that's a federal BOAC at a sort of bare minimum, you must list the Treasury Account Symbol TAS for all of your sort of BOACs and for all of your business lines, right? So if a single BOAC uses leasing, short-term rental, you would need to make those LOAs. And then two, what's very, very important is that in order for a sort of user to access wallet, they would need the finance officer role. And yeah, so for that, you will need to ask your sort of manager that gave you access to gsafleet.gov in order for them to basically give you that like sort of role there. And then also what's very cool is that you as the customer can maintain your LOAs at any time throughout the year, but you can also make the next fiscal year's LOAs as well during any sort of time time period. So for the next slide, this shows the wallet home screen. So basically, once you go to wallet under the financial tab, this is the home screen, right? So the sort of middle section that is going to showcase you all of the LOAs that your account is basically scoped to, right? So if you're from like the Army Bureau 19, you'll basically see every single BOAC that is under Bureau 19 that have wallet LOAs. So that is going to be something that needs to be well monitored. And when you're sort of making any sort of changes, you have to be sure that 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 you're actually making the change to your actual BOAC versus someone else's BOAC. And then so wallet can be filtered, right? So you will need to use these left-hand filters to find your actual BOAC's LOAs, and then to be able to edit a single line, there will be those very very little buttons there, those dots to the sort of the right hand side. And then lastly, if you want to make a sort of brand new LOA, you would use that blue button there. So for the next slide, after you click on that blue sort of button there, it'll take you to the left-hand side screen. So you would fill that out for sort of whatever BOAC's LOA that you want to make, right? So if you want to make an make a like for example, leasing non-accident line, so you would just like basically fill in the like fields there. So you put the fiscal year. For the fiscal year, you can only make current ones, like, and then also any like future one. So then you would just fill in the agency, the actual bureau code, and then the actual BOAC, and then pick the fleet offering that you want to do, and then just follow the actual next steps, and it'll take you to the sort of right hand side screen. So that'll be where you can put the treasury account symbol. So you'd fill out those sort of fields, and the fields that would need to be filled out are those like sort of red box fields. Those are the most common ones, but the first two sub-level prefix and the ATA may need to be filled out like depending on your funding. So for the next screen, these two will be the next sort of sections, depending on if you're civilian for the left-hand side versus DoD for the right-hand side. So for these sections, you'll be able to fill in any sort of obligation, like sort of fields, whether you like want to use that like funding to actually pay the like bills for the left-hand side for the civilian. And then for the DoD, same thing applies there. So you'll fill in all those fields for the right-hand side, and that is how the like system knows to pay your sort of bills via IPAC, right? So if the right like essentially if the system doesn't have any IPAC fields, then the statement will go via like non-IPAC that forces you to manually pay it via the manual sort of payment methods that we offer. So for the next slide here, we have a few sort of billing reminders. So one thing that just launched a few weeks ago is within gsafleet.gov is a delinquency page that shows our customers live the delinquency data. So this will be scoped to your roles and like sort of agency that your gsafleet.gov account is under, right? So if you're an Army person, you'll just see whatever BOACs that you have, and then it'll show you live data as of today on just basically whatever statements that you have outstanding, and you'll be able to export data from there. So let's just say that this page shows 50 statements, right? You'll be able to download like an Excel file that will show you any like any sort of statement data and things like that nature. And then two, you'll be able to that like sort of icon there that like says paying my bill. That'll basically give you a like few sort of resources that walks you through how to pay a bill. And then two, like it also lists our contact email box as well as GSA Finances. So if you have any sort of issues, you'll be able to send us an email there. And then for the like next slide here, just a few more bullet points on this. So you'll be able to pull stuff at any level. So you can filter it by multiple bureau codes, and then it'll show you those like sort of statements. Like I already mentioned, it's live data. So if 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 like right now you see a statement and then you go and pay that statement, it'll most likely should be taken off that tomorrow or the like following day. And then like I already mentioned, it just basically lists any sort of payment data, right? So it'll basically tell you what the actual statement is like and then also how it's been generated, right? So whether it's non-IPAC or IPAC. And then like I already mentioned, you'll be able to pull an Excel sheet that gives you further information, links to sort of these great like sort of resources that'll walk you through how to actually pay your bill. And then also, when you first log in to gsafleet.gov, there will be a sort of task board that shows that actual user, how many statements are outstanding, right? The dollar amount, and then things of that nature. And then one cool thing that's going to be coming is that beginning next month, the system will be sending automated emails notifying basically all users that have certain roles that have delinquent statements. So those like sort of people will be seeing those emails every single month until there's no delinquent statements for how they're all set up. And then next slide, I believe I'll be oh no, sorry. Yeah, so this will just shows our leasing sales codes, and the left-hand side shows just the regular recurring charges, and then on the right-hand side shows any AIEs. And so these will be the sales codes that are on your leasing bill. And yeah, I believe the next slide will be where I'll be passing it back to Ryan.
Yep, thanks, Reese. Those are some really helpful reminders. Megan, I saw a couple of questions that maybe you wanted to answer before we move into G-invoicing.
I actually think let's go into G-invoicing because some of the questions are specific to G-invoicing, and so we can kind of hit all that, and then we'll go back to these questions at the very end.
Excellent. So great to move straight from billing and VCSS in Wallet into the G-invoicing conversation. Hopefully you've been able to join some of the recent G-invoicing dedicated trainings that we've run. If not, we're happy to announce that GSA Fleet is officially live in G-invoicing. So we know that this is a gradual process and many of our partners are not ready. So that is totally fine, but we are excited to announce that a couple of our smaller agency partners are officially live in G-invoicing, and the billing and performance is currently running through the system. So what is the impact of moving to G-invoicing? The biggest impacts to GSA Fleet will be the vehicle purchase process. So this is agency-owned vehicles that are not leased. Also, of course, the billing process for all services, leasing, purchasing, STR, and managed services will be impacted by the move to G-invoicing. But the truth is that we're doing our best to make sure that our implementation is well tested and as smooth as possible. So our hope is that to the end user, there is not a massive impact. The next steps are to establish GT&C agreements. So we are aiming to do these at the highest level feasible within your organization. Most frequently, this is at the headquarter level. We're also working with your headquarter fleet and financial personnel to determine agency readiness, because we understand that, like GSA, many other organizations have to do a lot of system development to be able to handle and ingest the data from G-invoicing. We also are going to make updates to Wallet. I saw one question in the chat about Wallet. Functionally, there is not a huge change. Wallet will continue to exist. It will actually be more important than ever for you to maintain updated line of accounting information in Wallet, because that will talk directly to G-invoicing and inform how we issue the bills. Of course, IPAC until G-invoicing, it's going to be a slow rollout. There is no extraordinary rush, and we want to ensure that billing remains uninterrupted in that time. So we've worked with Treasury to ensure that IPAC will remain operational for those customers who are not yet able to transition into G-invoicing. Lastly, we just wanted to touch on some resources that are available. This is a screenshot from gsafleet.gov, and you can see under the Financials tab some really helpful links to Wallet, of course, but also our leasing rates. And on the far right, some resources that go over billing basics, how to pay, and G-invoicing. Get started with that. So that wraps up our formal presentation, but now we have plenty of time for some questions. So I'm going to take a look at the Q&A, and Megan, feel free to jump in if you have anything pressing.
I don't think so. Just since you talked about G-invoicing, Ryan, maybe we can kind of hit those questions and then kind of work our way back. So we had one really good question is, their agency, parts of their agency are ready to use G-invoicing, but not all parts. And so the question was, does G-invoicing have to be enabled at a bureau level, or can it be done at a BOAC level? And so the short answer is that it can be done at a BOAC level. We're signing our agreements, those GT&Cs, at the highest level possible within your agency, but we are happy to, the way it's going to functionally be enabled in gsafleet.gov is at a BOAC level. So we absolutely can, enable some BOACs, but not other BOACs within your agency and within your bureau code. It's all about what your agency is ready to do and how you're all set up. And so I also am happy to do, like slow rollout within your agency, just to make sure that it works. We do have testing that we can do as well, but it is everybody's working in really large agencies. So what works for one group over here might not work the same for another group over here. And I don't know that all of those nuances get figured out in testing when we test with your agency at that headquarters level. So feel free to reach out to us. We have that email address right here, which is our overall team mailbox, but we also have a dedicated G-invoicing mailbox, which consequently is monitored by the same people, but we have dedicated G-invoicing experts who help respond, and just to help us organize our emails a little better. But you can reach out to us at either place if you have any questions, and we'll get back to you with any specifics for your agency.
Thanks, Megan. We have another question. Agency-owned vehicles impacted by G-invoicing. Please explain briefly. So this is an important point of clarification. The leasing program will utilize the easy process in G-invoicing, while the purchasing program will use the standard seller-facilitated order process. The main place that you will interact with GSA Fleet for purchasing vehicles will continue to be gsafleet.gov. However, because we're using the seller facilitated order process in G-invoicing, there is an order pause step that will require you or your organization to go into G-invoicing and approve that order before the vehicle order is placed with the vendor. And that applies to modifications as well. It's a little bit more complex, but we're happy to talk more about that offline as well.
We have a couple of questions related to wallet, and some of them kind of cross over. So maybe I can take those ones next, Ryan, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Great. So there was a question of, can we please add the ability to download all assigned LOAs? And so what I think that is referring to is to download all of your BOACs and lines of accounting within Wallet. That is absolutely something that's on our radar as an enhancement to GSAFleet.gov. So we do hope to be able to provide that to you. In the meantime, until that is available, if that is something that you need, you can always reach out to us at fleetbusinessoversight@gsa.gov. We have the ability to go on the back end and pull the data for you. It's just not something that's available in the user interface for you all to do yourself yet. So you can reach out to us and we're happy to get that to you. A related question that we had is this individual manages a lot of BOACs and has more than 300 lines of accounting in Wallet, and noted that it's really hard to update them one by one, and asked if there was a mass update. That is also something that's on our radar for an enhancement to GSAFleet.gov to allow you all to download a report from Wallet and then re-upload updates. So it's all kind of tied together in that same functionality. Unfortunately, it is not available at this time. One thing I will note is that at the change in fiscal year, so as we look to FY27, you can go in and load your FY27 lines of accounting today. One thing I will say is if your lines of accounting aren't changing, so let's say you use Know Your Money and your treasury account symbol reflects that, we will roll over your FY26 treasury account symbol into FY27. If you have 1-year funds, so for example, your treasury account symbol today is a beginning period of availability of 2026 and an ending period of availability of 2026, we will automatically roll that over to 27 for 2027, 2027. So we have some logic built in based on assumed changes to a treasury account symbol. Obviously, we highly encourage you all to review after that rollover happens to make sure everything looks correct. But if those are the types of changes that you're doing, it might be more prudent use of your time to just wait for that rollover to happen and then check and confirm that what we did looks right. Because I do understand that at this point in time, it is very slow and hard to make those updates on an individual line of accounting basis. If you have any further questions on that you want to discuss further, we're happy to engage on that, and you can reach out at the email address here. And then finally, the only other thing that I'll add is that we did have someone say, do I need to use Wallet? And that's a great question. It sounds like they may have been misinformed by an FSR that they didn't need to. If you work for a federal entity or you yourself are a federal employee and your vehicles are paid for by a federal line of accounting, it is required to have something in Wallet. Now, when we migrated to Wallet 3 years ago, we auto-populated treasury account symbols for every agency based on information that we had available to us. Now, that information might not have been correct, which is why we always encourage you to go into Wallet and review what's loaded there. And like I said, we have rules to roll things over from year to year because it is a requirement for us to report to Treasury intergovernmental transactions that occur. So we have to report to Treasury that we are doing business with your Treasury account symbol, and you have to report to Treasury that you're doing business with our Treasury account symbol. So it's a two-way reporting requirement, and Wallet helps fulfill that requirement. So everybody should be using Wallet. Just because you've never been in there doesn't mean it's not working correctly. We could just luckily be having the correct information rolling over year over year, but it is a requirement. So if you want more information specifically on Wallet or just want to talk about a specific use case, you can also, again, reach out to us and we'll be happy to educate or share our information that we have with you on it. Turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Megan. We have one question. This is pertaining to G-invoicing. Is the 7600 easy process the only choice for recurring charges? So the short answer is yes. And those recurring charges refer to fleet leasing, STR, and managed services. So the use of the easy process in G-invoicing is the only choice for that at this time. And we do not expect that to change given the nature of GSA Fleet's leasing business, which is recurring services that continue in perpetuity. I believe I heard you say that there are some agencies that may not see changes to their bill in FY27. So it's not agency specific. And again, our rate changes are always made at the vehicle level. So the 5% is the aggregate that applies to the entire fleet. It's not going to necessarily apply to individual vehicles based on how the financial performance of that SIN is overall. I will add, though, that specifically for those vehicles between $75,000 and $100,000, they should not see a change to their monthly charge in FY27, given the update to the high cost threshold module and the way that we are handling those vehicles moving to standard rates. If you do have more questions about your specific vehicles, definitely please feel free to reach out to the email on screen, though.
We have one question about the references to a continuing resolution, but I think I'll answer it more broadly to include shutdowns as well. So the question is, if there's a continuing resolution, when should we go in to update wallet? So as I mentioned, GSAFleet.gov is designed to automatically at midnight on October 1st, every fiscal year, roll over those lines of accounting and make those updates if you haven't done so already yourself. If an FSR goes in and issues an AIE because you got into an accident on October 1st and October 5th, they go in to issue an AIE for that accident. That AIE will be generated and the billing record is generated at the time the AIE is processed, meaning we're generating a billing record for you on October 5th. And we will generate that billing record with the best information that we have at our disposal, which will be what is in wallet. So I would say update wallet as soon as you can. If for some reason there's a government shutdown, your line of accounting doesn't end up being what our rollover said it was, your agency can always reconcile that with our financial friends over in GSA Finance. There's a whole process to correct anything that has already been billed to an incorrect line of accounting, but obviously we'd rather get it up front and have everything be correct the first time around and not have to have extra administrative work on the back end to make those corrections. So my answer will always be as soon as possible, because starting on October 1st, we generate billing charges and we reference whatever is in wallet on that day. So if you had a charge that got created in GSAFleet.gov on October 2nd, but you didn't update your line of accounting until October 3rd, we're billing what was in there on October 2nd. And so that is always, I know, a tricky thing, especially for some of you who can't create your obligations until after the start of the fiscal year. It is a tricky timeline for all of us, but that is how it is acting right now. And like I said, if there's ever anything that we bill that doesn't match what you need it to, you can always charge back or work with GSA Finance to get it corrected. We can always do that for you. So go into wallet as soon as you can. And then we also had a question about, has it become easier to set up ACH payments? So one thing I'll note about ACH payments is, as we move to G-invoicing, almost all federal customers are going to be required to use G-invoicing, which means you shouldn't really be using ACH payments. If you're a non-federal entity, meaning you are with the tribal organization, DC government, if you have a contractor use FOAC that's set up that way, ACH will still be the method that you use to make payments. And I think the setting up of an ACH is a process that's on your side, not GSA's side. So I don't think that we have the ability to make that easier for you, unfortunately, to my knowledge. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can connect you with our finance team that more specifically works on the collection of ACH payments.
We have a question on AIEs for premium fuel, and we understand that there is a lot of automation, which makes it really efficient for us on our end, but there is always mistakes that happen. And if you do have a situation unique to yourself that you would like to ask questions on, please reach out to the inbox on the screen. It's just a little more easier and we're able to gather more context for your unique situation.
Or your FSR too. Your FSR is sometimes the closest connected to your AIEs and to the specific reasons for those AIEs. So they're always happy to help explain things. As Ryan said, we're trying to use automation as much as possible. Sometimes we're at the whim of data provided by our vendors. And so if the data provided by our vendor doesn't correlate to what's actually happening, that's something that's really good for us to be aware of and document. So definitely be in touch with either us or your FSR. If you don't know who your FSR is, we'll probably connect you to the FSR if you reach out to us directly. So we have a lot of questions about the MCC approval limit. It seems like a lot of you are maybe familiar with a limit that has been in place in the past. The auto approval limit for the MCC, that maintenance control center limit, meaning if you have work done on your car, or your vehicle, there is an automatic approval threshold. That's a dollar amount threshold. I just want to note that we are regularly reviewing and assessing the reasonableness of that threshold. It has been raised in the last year due to staffing in the MCC. Just like everybody else in government, we were impacted by reduced staffing levels due to DRP and other incentive programs. So we are working to restaff some of our MCC positions. And so that threshold dollar amount can change. So I don't want to say out loud what the threshold is. The whole goal of the threshold, though, is to ensure that we are being charged appropriately by our vendors. So even though costs are increasing and we raise that high cost threshold for rates, that MCC threshold is really a protection for the government to ensure that we aren't being price gouged by vendors, or the incorrect work that doesn't need to be done on vehicles is getting done. So it really is a nice control that we have in our system, and it is something we evaluate regularly. So it's not $100 today, but it could come back to $100 in the future. So I don't want to get anybody's hopes up by saying it's different. I know that it can sometimes delay repairs from getting done for some of you, but hopefully it's not delaying things significantly. And if you ever have any questions or concerns on that front, you're welcome to reach out to us. But do know that those thresholds are designed to protect the government and ensure prudent spending, and to help keep your rates low, to be honest. The less, the less things cost, the cheaper we can keep your rates. And so we are trying to help, protect government taxpayer dollars to the best that we can.
Thanks, Megan. It looks like that is all the open questions, but we do have a little bit of time, so we'll hang out and give you the chance to ask any more questions. Great question. Are we still getting charged for AFE surcharge? So the AFE surcharge is set at the agency headquarter level and applies to all vehicles within that agency, and it may change throughout the year based on the acquisition goals and requirements of that agency. So right now, there are many agencies who have their surcharge turned off because that is fitting for their unique situation. However, if you do have questions about your current situation, it's best to reach out to your agency headquarter fleet manager or your FSR. But the AFE surcharge program as a program is still valid and is still moving forward. I am a vehicle purchaser for my agency. I have not attended any G-invoicing classes. Has GSA started the training process? We have, and there are several recordings of recent sessions that are available on our YouTube page, but there's also plenty of resources available on gsafleet.gov. We don't have any agencies currently that are live on the purchasing side in G-invoicing. However, we are working with several organizations, and if you do have specific questions, we encourage you to reach out to the inbox on the screen, and we'll redirect you as needed. But we're happy to help and assist in training you as well as we may be able to. And I see in the chat, Annette also posted the link to the GSA YouTube page, which is a great place to find those recordings that I was just speaking about.
And just a plug on that front too, next Tuesday, July 7th, not next Tuesday, in 2 weeks on July 7th, we are hosting a Q&A session for G-invoicing. So if you haven't had a chance to attend any of our stuff yet, you are welcome to join us then. It's at noon Eastern time. And I think the information should be available up on our website to register for that. So please do feel free to join us there. It's a great opportunity. We try to keep those sessions. We usually open them with like a quick 5 or 10 minute presentation just to orient everybody. But then it's open for Q&A, which I've learned a lot from customers on those sessions. Hopefully you all can learn from each other too. And so please feel free to join that as maybe your first foray into G-invoicing training with us.
We have a question. Does LOA refer to how many vehicles you have or how many BOECs you have? And I know we use a lot of acronyms and jargon, but LOA refers to line of accounting, and it's essentially how we bill you and your agency. So each BOAC will have its own line of accounting.
Megan, are we good to close things out for today?
Looks like we got one question in. I would say let's answer this question and then yeah, we can close it out.
Sure.
And any further questions?
It snuck in there. It snuck in there on us.
I think right when you went off mute.
Yep, for sure.
Ryan, do you want to answer this one?
Sure. So the question is, customers' DAI system requires a GTNC be uploaded into the system. Do we know who the point of contact is for this agency's GTNC agreement? And so that works directly on that. We don't have it on this screen, but there is a dedicated email inbox, GSA Fleet _ G-invoicing at gsa.gov. Reese, if you could type that into the chat, but if you email the inbox on screen as well, it's monitored by the same people and we'll be able to answer your questions.
All right, I think we're good, Annette.
Fantastic. Thank you, Megan, Ryan, Reese, and Says. As always, you guys do a fantastic job. We really appreciate it. And for everybody attending, we had close to around 200 people. So thank you very much. Just to remind everybody that the slides will be posted on the Desktop Workshop website and the recording will be there as well. We dropped a couple of URLs in the chat where the YouTube pages, where our training pages, and where you can register for upcoming training. So check those out as well. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.